I want to take a moment on behalf of my father to thank everyone for the calls and cards wishing my father well. The outpouring of support and offers of help during my father's illness were heartwarming. I want to especially show my appreciation for those who provided comfort and assistance to my father during his illness. Hyacinth, his aide, thank you for taking care of my dad right up to the very end. He wasn't an easy patient, but you found a way to convince him to eat and drink and stay strong. You are a true angel and are doing God's work. Ellen Goldman, thank you for watching over my father and keeping him company when he was so isolated and bored, and for all of your visits to the hospital and running errands, and for your prayers and caring. He loved you and considered you his sister. To Cheech, wow. Thank you for your years and years of taking care of my dad and for your friendship, and many visits to the hospital and to our house, not only to take care of him, but also to check in on us. Cheech came to our house every day, and every third day, he would shave my father and clean him up. It was very special. He is the fourth brother to our trio, and we will forever be indebted to him. To Marilyn, for spending the last years with him and for accompanying him on the last few adventures and for your companionship, thank you. And to the doctors, Dr. Rappaport, Dr. Philippus, Dr. Bernstein, and Dr. Cavallo, for your tireless effort to give my father the best chances of survival while preserving his dignity and being considerate of his quality of life. And to the staff of Chilton Hospital for taking such good care of my father during his many extended stays under your care. The words to express the level of gratitude I have for my brothers do not exist. The sacrifices they made to tend to my father over the years, and especially this past year, were beyond extraordinary for both my father and for myself being so far away. Brad, you've been so dedicated to caring for Dad since Mom's passing. You stepped up and led the way when Dad fell ill. I look up to you for the level of patience and care you had for Dad at the expense of your own personal life. I know Dad was your best friend and how much he meant to you and how he felt the same. Scott, your consistent support for Dad and middle-of-the-night drives to and from our home show the depth of your love for our father, and he always knew you were there when he needed you to be. My father loved his daughters-in-law and was supremely proud of his grandchildren. The look on his face the first time he held each one of you was priceless. He loved the time he spent with you and hearing the stories of your development into adults and achievements. He was happy that each one of you was principled and driven and kind. He left this world knowing that he had done his part to make sure that the next generation of Shalits honors his namesake and legacy. My father was born in Newark, the last of 5 children, at the height of the Depression. It was 1933, the year Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, and my father, being too young, watched his brothers go off to fight in the war and thankfully return home safely. My father loved history, and the bookshelves of our house are packed tightly with the books he read about World War II and Israel. My father was creative and a talented artist. He received a scholarship in art to Pratt University, but when it came time to pick a career, he didn't think he could make a living in art. So he turned down the scholarship in favor of attending Rutgers University School of Pharmacy. He graduated with a BS in pharmacy and took a job as a pharmacist. But my father wanted more. What he wanted was to be hands-on and to help people. He wanted to be a doctor. He applied to medical schools in the United States, but he didn't have the requisite courses for admission. Undeterred, a friend of his told him about attending med school in Amsterdam, as they didn't have the same prerequisites. The only problem was that the lectures were all given in Dutch. My father knew a little German, so he figured close enough, and off he went. And before long, true to my father, who was an extraordinary flirt, he found a cute girl to teach him all the Dutch he needed. He spent 2 years in Amsterdam, but wanted to get back to the States. He applied to Duke Medical School and was granted an interview. He took a freighter back from Amsterdam and was granted an interview. He met with each of the department heads who verbally quizzed him on the different disciplines of medicine. When the admissions committee told him they needed 6 weeks to come to a decision, he notified them that his freighter back to the Netherlands was leaving in a week and he would be on it without a decision. So they immediately conferred and granted him admission to the school. After med school, he started his internship in Philadelphia General Hospital, but transferred to the East Orange VA Hospital to be near his ailing father. While at the VA, a patient told him that he should come to Wayne and open a practice. Wayne was a one traffic light farm town, so my father was skeptical he could make a go of it there. But he sat in the library of Chilton Hospital taking house calls, and within 6 months, had enough patients to open a practice. His oldest brother, Ben, set him up on a date with his friend's cousin, Sherry Goodman. The date went well, and they fell in love. A year later, they were engaged. My father was so thrilled about being engaged. You see, his mother had been nagging him for years about getting married. So with his fiancée in hand, they rushed to visit her and share their great news. But when they announced that they were to be wed, his mother replied, "So why the rush? What's the hurry?" Despite this caution, they got married soon thereafter. The following year, they had a son, and 2 years after that, my father was drafted into the Vietnam War. He was assigned to an Army base in Indian Town Gap, Pennsylvania, where he served his tour as base doctor to 3,000 dependents. He left the Army with the rank of major and a second son to boot. He then returned to Wayne to resume building his practice, as well as his family, by adding a third son. He would go on to become the president of Chilton Memorial Hospital and continue to practice medicine in Wayne for 53 years. Now, if it were up to my father, what I just read would have been a sufficient eulogy. He was understated and humble, and the story of his life would have been that, simply put. During one of my father's early chemotherapy sessions, he asked me to write and deliver his eulogy. It was disheartening that he wasn't thinking positively about his chances of survival, but I understood. He just wanted to be prepared for every outcome. He also requested that I perform it for him before he died. It wasn't about fact-checking or anything like that. He just wanted me to put a frame around his life experience and recount his contributions to the world in a way he might not have been capable of doing. I was sad, but honored that he wanted me to help define his legacy. It was a gift to both of us as we spent time engaged in a series of interviews and discussions about his life, and I got to know my father a little bit better. As it turns out, my father's life was more meaningful than the chronology of facts and dates I just mentioned, but that is how my father saw his life. The day I read his eulogy to him almost 7 weeks ago, it was our way of saying goodbye. We cried and embraced each other, and we're thankful that we had the experience of having each other in our lives. So here we go. Here's the eulogy. "Why are you crying, Daddy?" I repeated to my father as he sobbed in the front row of the funeral chapel seated next to his siblings. The smell of wool suits, damp with tears, still fresh in my mind. One of my earliest memories is of my Grandma Sadie's funeral. I was 6, and I had no comprehension of life or death or what was happening. All I knew was that my father was sad. He had dutifully cared for his mother, both as her son and her doctor, all the way through to her passing. I received no answer to my question and was whisked away to the rear of the chapel, but the moment was forever imprinted in my memory. Last June, when I heard my father's voice on the phone, I knew he had serious news to tell me. There was a shift in his tone and a hesitation in his voice that was not typical. But just as he had done with thousands of patients and their families over the course of his career, he laid out his diagnosis, and as painful as it was to deliver, his prognosis. My father was a pragmatist and a realist, so he knew very well the meaning of his pancreatic cancer diagnosis. The odds were severely stacked against him, and at 84, he knew any fight would be devastatingly rough. He understood what fate had in store for the final chapter of his life and simply called his diagnosis a real kick in the head. And although the disappointment was evident in his voice, he remained stoic. The next day, Dr. Shalit woke up early, just as he had done so for the past 53 years, except for Wednesdays, drove to his office, donned a stethoscope, and saw a full schedule of patients. At the end of the day, he unceremoniously hung up his lab coat for the very last time. The man who loved what he did for a living thought if he just kept doing it, he could fight off Father Time forever. It was perhaps, except for the leasing of a candy apple red Porsche for his 50th birthday, the most impractical thing I had ever seen him do. But as it turns out, he was right. Not about the Porsche, but about keeping his medical practice for so long. He loved helping people. It kept him sharp, happy, full of purpose, and most importantly, healthy. The years were filled to the brim with thousands and thousands of handshakes, hugs, and messages of gratitude from patients and the loved ones of patients who got to hold their fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and even sons and daughters a little longer in this world, thanks to my father's thoroughness and skill at examination and diagnosis. Every time we went out for dinner, one or two patients would come to our table to say hello and to introduce themselves to our family and tell us how much they loved and admired my dad. One of his earliest patients was so grateful, he gave my father a pony. Spot the pony. I think it was a Jewish horse. One of the benefits of practicing medicine in a farm town. My father relished the appreciation in whatever form it came, but was always humble. Medicine was my father's love, and giving it up was not an option he would take voluntarily. My father was very dedicated and worked hard to take care of his patients. I vividly remember the many times I was awakened in the middle of the night to the sound of his clomping dress shoes as he walked down the marble hallway past my bedroom on his way out the door to see a patient at the hospital. Sometimes he would even go multiple times a night. When my father had spinal decompression surgery 10 years ago, he was left mostly paralyzed in his right arm. Undeterred, he used his left hand to steady the right and continue practicing. He struggled greatly, but his disability was not enough to get him to give up. A few years ago, he underwent bypass surgery, and his staff was certain that he was finished. Nope, he just kept on going. Even after he retired from his office practice last June, my father continued to diagnose friends' ailments and prescribe medications for them. But he knew he needed to tend to the care of one last patient. Months ago, we rushed my father to the hospital with sepsis. His blood pressure crashed, and a rapid response team was called to his room to save his life. As things took a turn for the worse, the team of doctors hovered over him to discuss medical strategy. All of a sudden, my father snapped out of his semi-conscious state to participate in the consultation just as he was standing over another patient. It was clear that to the very end, my father would be an active participant in his medical care, but more importantly to him, continue to be a doctor. As my father recovered from the bout of sepsis, he sat on the foot of his bed, looked at me and said, "I never thought this is what retirement would be like." I chuckled, and I reminded him that this is the very picture of what his retirement would be like. You see, there is no Alan Shalit without the MD attached to the end of his name. He wasn't a golfer or a tennis player. There was no game to retire to. And at 84, it was clear his retirement plan was to continue to work at his practice for as long as he could. He loved his practice, and his practice loved him back. He loved telling jokes to his patients. He was a great joke teller. When he learned a new joke, he would tell it over and over again to his patients. Each time he delivered the punchline, his smile took over his entire face, almost shutting his eyes completely. His signature giggle would follow, and for the really, really good jokes, his shoulders would bob up and down. At the 100th telling of the joke, he wasn't laughing at the same punchline as much as he was just thrilled to spread joy and make people laugh. In that way, I'm a lot like my father, and thank him for that gift. 1 week after suffering a significant cardiac event, one of my father's patients, Sam Goldberg, came to the office with his wife for a consultation. My father asked that Mr. Goldberg remain in the waiting room while he met with Mrs. Goldberg alone. He calmly explained to Mrs. Goldberg that her husband was in a fragile state, and that going forward, when her husband returned home from work, she needed to greet him at the door with his favorite cocktail, speak to him softly, and have relations with him 3 to 4 times a week to keep his heart healthy. Mrs. Goldberg returned to the waiting room to a very anxious husband. What'd he say? What'd he say? Asked Mr. Goldberg, to which Mrs. Goldberg replied, "You're going to die." My father knew that next to actual medicine, laughter was the best medicine. One of my favorite things to do was to just sit around with him and my brothers and say funny things until the tears streamed down his face. It happened often. It was priceless, and each and every time I got to deliver the gift of crying, each and every time I got to give the gift of crying laughter to my father. I looked up to my father. He was my hero. The fact is, though, he was a hero to many. Many of you are still here today because my father was such an excellent diagnostician. He had a great skill for asking the right questions based on the symptoms and the history of the patient to either arrive at the right diagnosis or to recommend further tests to either rule out or confirm a more serious affliction. Those that heeded his advice, most likely than not, were able to achieve early detection of what was hopefully a treatable illness. Thousands under his care got to enjoy a longer and healthier life as a result of his prowess and dedication to the practice of medicine. And that was just his day job. Outside of the office and without the white cape of his lab coat, my father achieved true superhero status. Numerous newspaper articles chronicled the times he stepped forward to help somebody in distress. Whether it was the time mid-flight he pulled an airline passenger in full cardiac arrest into the aisle to resuscitate him, or the time he jumped into a rodeo ring at a dude ranch to save a small child who fell into the ring and would certainly have been trampled if not for my dad's selfless decision to risk his own life to carry a stranger's child to safety. And I can't even count the number of times he saved choking victims in restaurants, but it had to be a record. My father was put on earth to save lives, and he did it with the utmost humility and integrity. I know this because the newspaper articles written about his heroics are hidden in the bottom of drawers and not hanging on the walls of our house. My father was quiet and pensive, not a man of many words. His practicality clashed with any belief in God, but he enjoyed the traditions of Judaism and was a Zionist and a supporter of Israel. He rarely got mad, even though we gave him good reason to. He loved history, particularly anything to do with World War II, as it was such a prominent backdrop to his childhood. My father loved my mother immensely, and it wasn't unusual to find them in a warm embrace. He loved to travel the world with her, and the decor in our house echoed the many destinations they visited over the years. My father wasn't a man of many vices, if you don't count drinking, smoking, and gambling, but none of it to any notable excess. My father liked collecting stamps and coins and had a green thumb. The abundance of plants in our house is a testament to my dad's love of gardening and bringing things to life. In our dining room, for as long as I can remember, is a potted corn plant. The corn plant bloomed once every 10 years or so. And 1 week before my father passed away, as if it knew, it bloomed and filled the house with its sweet aroma. My father liked keeping the house neat and clean. He was relentless in this pursuit. Up until the time he turned 75, he would strap on a gas-packed blower, climb a ladder onto the roof, and clean out the gutters. We finally had to take his ladders away, but he continued to blow off the leaves around the pool and tend to the general maintenance around the house. He was unstoppable. I don't remember ever playing catch with my dad. He just wasn't that kind of dad. But he was at all of our ball games, proud and cheering. Took us fishing in Canada and on multiple vacations a year, Disney, the Catskills. He encouraged me and my brothers in his own gentle manner to study and achieve in life. He firmly believed in education and guided us to pursue graduate degrees just as he did. He taught me how to use power tools and fix stuff around the house. He showed me how to use my imagination to solve problems. He was a shutterbug and built a dark room in our basement to develop and print his own work. I was right beside him, taking pictures and doing my own dark room work. We did a lot together, just not sports. He even let the three of us beat the crap out of each other to establish our own identities. We got over it, and as brothers, we are as close as can be, a true gift. We never went without or for want of anything. There was an expectation that we would try our best, and in return had seemingly unlimited amount of trust and freedom during our childhood, even in instances when it went against my father's best judgment. There were sports cars and swim parties and keggers and sleepovers. He and my mother even wallpapered one of the bathrooms in the house in Playboy centerfold. I mean, how cool was that? Who else has that? It was rare to hear the word no in our house. When I turned 15, I wanted a moped and freedom. My father was vehemently against it. Having been around emergency rooms, he saw firsthand the carnage that motorcycle accidents caused. His argument was perfectly rational, except for one small detail. When my father was attending medical school in Amsterdam, he rode around on a Vespa scooter and didn't wear a helmet. He reluctantly relented, but knew deep down that I deserved the same chance he did to be adventurous, even if it meant that I would be exposed to some amount of danger. My father loved practicing medicine, but was severely disheartened how the insurance industry changed it. When it came time for me to start thinking about a career in medicine, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out an insurance reimbursement check in the amount of 37 cents. To my father, the insult was twofold. First, the amount of the reimbursement was just ridiculous. But the fact that the insurance company paid the postman 39 cents to deliver that check was the real insult. My father didn't have any regrets that his sons didn't end up becoming physicians. Scott got the closest by becoming a dentist. But what my father didn't realize was that all three of his sons ended up in the family business, helping people. And he left behind a legacy of service and compassion for the plight of others. My father was at his very best when my mother fell ill. He remained sharp and made practical decisions that gave my mother the best chance of survival, while providing love and compassion for his wife in her greatest time of need. He knew full well her battle with small cell lung cancer was futile. My mother wasn't strong enough to endure the brutal treatments, and the prognosis was bleak. Despite his belief, he kept up a front of hope for his wife and three sons and allowed us to shoot for a miracle. When my mother developed pneumonia and we had to temporarily suspend her treatments, it started to become evident that we were going to lose the battle. My father was willing to go along with any decision my brothers and I made. But the product of my upbringing, under a blanket of pragmatism and compassion, I knew the fight was lost. The righteous path became clear, and we discontinued the heroic efforts to save my mother, to give her the peaceful passing she deserved. It was selfless and kind. It fit the narrative of my father's life, and my brothers and I became adults that day. My father, well, he lost his soulmate, and for the next 18 years found companionship in a handful of women, but couldn't replace the deep love he had for my mother. Over the years, my fathers watched patients and their families struggle with the same end-of-life decisions that weighed the quality of life and suffering of the patient against the unwillingness of the family to surrender their loved one to eternity. As the path to my father's passing became evident, memories of the compassionate care that was provided to my mother surfaced. They were sweet and overshadowed the grim images of her succumbing to her illness. Little did we know at the time how valuable of a life lesson we had been given. It is the culmination of a child's journey into adulthood. At birth, the child is vulnerable and reliant upon a parent for basic needs, comfort, and survival. Over time, the child matures, and one day the roles reverse, and the child fulfills its destiny by caring for a parent during its most vulnerable time, ultimately providing an assuring and comforting hug as they slip into slumber for the last time. "Why are you crying, Daddy?" asked an innocent 6-year-old boy at his grandmother's funeral. His father gave him no answer that day. It wasn't appropriate, but he took a lifetime to teach his son there's a place for pragmatism and a place for compassion. And just beyond the edge of the ability of medicine to extend life is where they intersect to reveal the righteous path. You can rationalize death as a natural part of life, but there is still pain and loss, and I cry for that loss. I rest knowing that I provided these lessons to you and that you will take time to teach the same to your children one day. Nothing is forever, so don't spend your life thinking you can save yourself or anyone else from fate. In all my years as a doctor, I saved not a single life. I merely extended the ones I could. So spend your time on this earth living your life in pursuit of the things that make you happy, just as I have done. Don't smoke, as I did. But if it makes you happy, travel, drink, and gamble in moderation, but love to excess. And every once in a while, throw in a candy apple red Porsche for good measure. I love you, Daddy. Sweet dreams. Thank you.